Hey everybody, welcome to the City Parks Alliance webinar, which is hosted in partnership with the Prevention Institute. The webinar is about ensuring inclusive growth with new park projects. My name is Alessandro Rigolon. I'm an associate professor in the Department of City Metropolitan Planning at the University of Utah, and I'm from Salt Lake City. I'll be moderating today's discussion and sharing some of the recent research on the topic of green gentrification. For the ones of you who are not familiar with City Parks Alliance, it is the only independent nationwide membership organization that is solely dedicated to urban parks. It's a network of cross-sector park leaders who focus on the intersection between parks and other critical urban infrastructure to build equitable and healthy cities. Please visit the website at cityparksalliance.org to learn more and join this committed network of park leaders across the country. Prevention Institute is a national nonprofit who is dedicated to promoting health, safety, and well-being through thriving, equitable communities. Prevention Institute, or PI, manages the People, Parks, and Power Initiative, which is the first national funding initiative in the US to support power building by community-based organizations and to reverse deep-seated park and green space inequities in Black, Latino, and Indigenous communities across the country. Support for this webinar is provided by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. All right, on to today's topic. So, as you might know, many US cities are seeking to build and improve parks in neighborhoods that have historically been disenfranchised, neighborhoods of color, low-income neighborhoods. Many of these initiatives have been successful, but unfortunately, many others have resulted in what we call green gentrification. What is this? It's the influx of affluent, college-educated, oftentimes white, new residents to formerly low-income communities of color. And this influx is due in part to the creation of new parks and green spaces. The influx of new residents can result in the displacement of long-time low-income renters of color, and also in those residents feeling no longer welcome in their neighborhood. This idea of green gentrification, however, is a complicated process. So the first thing I want to get out of the way is that it doesn't happen the same way every time a new park is built in an underserved community. Research, for example, has shown that new large greenway parks, new parks that are built close to downtowns, and other greening initiatives like tree planting programs and community gardens have been linked to gentrification. As you might have heard, the most dramatic impacts have been from large transformative greenway projects like the Atlanta Beltline and the Bloomingdale Trail in Chicago. The second point I want to make is that greening initiatives interact with other factors in shaping gentrification outcomes. In a recent paper, Isabella Bilaski and colleagues in Barcelona found that green space can have a lead, integrated, or subsidiary role in explaining gentrification. What does it mean? So it means that greening can be the driving factor in gentrification, can be the leading factor, like in the case of the Atlanta Beltline or Chicago Bloomingdale Trail. It can be as important as other factors in shaping gentrification, for example, alongside real estate development, or in some cases can still have an impact but play a minor or subsidiary role alongside other things. So this enhanced understanding of the role of greening in gentrification can help design policies that prevent displacement and help low-income communities of color thrive in place when greening happens. To this extent, we know that many cities around the country, including some of the speakers we're going to hear from today, are starting to work with community-based organizations to develop strategies for inclusive growth. This includes the creation or preservation of affordable housing, the protection of renters, support of businesses and job creation, and also initiatives to help communities build capacity. Overall, it is important to take more decisive actions to prevent displacement for green space projects that have a transformative impact, that are bigger and larger, and those that, as we just heard, might play a leading role in creating gentrification. So in this webinar today, you will hear about two cities' approaches to supporting residents and stabilizing communities in the face of park projects and other influxes of investment. With us today are Chris People, who is the Director of Equity and Economic Impact at Great Rivers Greenway in St. Louis, Missouri, and Tomas Rivera, community organizer and chain breaker collective in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Chris will be talking about Great Rivers Greenway's work in engaging the community around the Brickline Greenway project, and also how the organization is working with residents to create strategies for community stabilization, ownership, and empowerment while various segments of the greenways are built. Tomas will be discussing Chainbreaker's power building approach to their anti-gentrification work. Chainbreaker focuses on transportation and housing issues, in addition to more recent work on park projects, which is part of their involvement in Prevention Institute's People, Parks, and Power cohort. As a result, they bring a broad community-based perspective to the issue of gentrification and to the multiple drivers of displacement. Thanks so much for both of you for sharing your stories today. So before letting Chris and Tomas speak, I want to share some quick housekeeping items, and so we can get started. So we have a great turnout today. I think more than 600 people sign up, so it's amazing. And to ensure that we can respond to everybody as questions or technical difficulties arise, here are a couple of tips. So to ask a question, click the questions icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Type your question and click send. Feel free to send questions throughout the presentation. Just know that we will holding them until the end. If you experience a technical problem during the presentation, please type it in the question box and send it to us. If you missed something, don't worry. There's going to be links to today's recording, presentation, and related resources that are going to be emailed to all who registered. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Chris from Great Rivers Greenway in St. Louis. Chris, take it away. Chris, you're muted.
You always get it that way, don't you? Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, it looks great.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Sorry about that. Appreciate y'all. Thank you for the introduction. It is an honor to be here on behalf of Great Rivers Greenway. As stated, my name is Chris Peoples. I am the first Director of Equity and Economic Impact here at Great Rivers Greenway. Today, I'll give you a brief overview of Great Rivers Greenway as an organization, and then a summary of the Brickline Greenway project. And then we'll delve into my work, which focuses on promoting equitable economic growth in some of St. Louis's most underserved neighborhoods. So who is Great Rivers Greenway? Great Rivers Greenway is a public agency making the St. Louis region, a more vibrant place to live, work, and play by developing a regional network of greenways. Each greenway is unique and reflects the character of the community it connects. The Greenway works with community stakeholders along with hundreds of partners and businesses to make the greenways relevant and exciting. We take our stewardship of the community's investment seriously, with 94 cents of every dollar going towards building, promoting, and sustaining the Greenway network. This map shows the first 300 miles that the community members have identified as priorities. 135 miles have already been brought to life, and the region is enjoying and exploring those. In addition to recreational uses, we have determined that our Greenway network in underserved and under-resourced communities provide accessibility to transportation, to jobs, education, and other economic opportunities. Maybe 1 second with my slide transitions. Sorry about that. This map's Today, I want to highlight one of the St. Louis region's most forward-thinking and transformational projects. This map reflects the overall framework plan for the Brick Line Greenway. The Brick Line is a bold vision to connect the people of St. Louis to its most treasured places while creating inspirational experiences and promoting economic growth opportunities. This will be a network of about 10 miles of greenway connecting the city's four major parks, linking 14 neighborhoods and crossing hundreds of destinations in between. The project is broken into several phases to align with our funding opportunities, with most of our federal funding coming in 2025 and 26. The goal is to have the initial 10-mile network completed by 2030. Now I'll give you a quick overview of some of the project segments. This first segment is known as the Central Corridor. To be constructed connecting Forest Park through BJC Washington University Medical Center campus and traveling along our light rail corridor, this segment will connect St. Louis's major institutions, innovation, and entertainment districts. It is also home to the first segment of the Brick Line that was constructed in 2018 and shown on the left at the Cortex Innovation District Metrolink station. The next segment is known as Mill Creek Valley. To be constructed in the heart of the former Mill Creek Valley neighborhood, this greenway design process included collaboration with local artists who explored opportunities to commemorate the people who lived and were displaced from the Mill Creek Valley neighborhood in 1950 under the Urban Renewal Act. Working in collaboration with City SC, St. Louis's new MLS stadium, a portion of this segment was opened in spring 2023. This picture shows some of the remaining African-American residents who were displaced by the renewal project. And this was the opportunity for not only Great Rivers Greenway, but our city to honor the people that were displaced through urban renewal. The next segment is known as the North Connector. And unlike the previous segments, which have major anchors and are highly developed areas of the city, this segment will be constructed in our most disinvested neighborhoods. Connecting Fairground Park to the Central Corridor, this approximately 2-mile portion of the Greenway benefits from a $15 million raise grant and an additional $11 million in funding through city and government grants. Bringing this level of funding to communities that haven't seen meaningful investment in over 15 years is what drives my work. Part of what gives us the confidence of planning such a visionary project is seeing what other cities have accomplished with their major infrastructure and green space projects. Lessons learned, millions in investment will return hundreds of millions and billions in economic development. However, Great Rivers Greenway and the community leaders involved in the process researched public and private greenway developments around the country, like the Indianapolis Cultural Trail, Atlanta Beltline, and New York High Line. And we studied these projects for their good and their bad. For example, like the Atlanta East Side Trail, it helped stabilize neighborhoods, but it greatly impacted property values and increased displacement. And there are other examples, as Alejandro stated earlier, like in Chicago, DC, and Miami. But to try to highlight some positives of this project investment is projected to return twofold in economic growth, saved healthcare costs, and new jobs. And GRG is committed to the fact that this is more than just an infrastructure project. It is fostering community building, connectivity, and opportunities in historically marginalized neighborhoods. Fact-finding and research building is critical to painting a holistic economic development narrative. To address the potential inequities, in 2018, the original Framework Planning Committee created 2 working groups focused on providing recommendations for equitable outcomes for the project's future planning, design, and along with economic development that would empower the community. However, it was realized for that to be successful and achieved, these working groups had to intersect. As a result, an Equitable Economic Development Working Group was established to build strategies to ensure equitable economic development. Formed in late 2020, the The Equity and Economic Development Working Group used Invest STL's emerging framework to identify and evaluate investment strategies. The plan focused on 4 key areas for promoting economic or equitable development in underserved neighborhoods. First, the people, understanding community members' lived experiences and helping them to improve their quality of life. Next, power, encouraging participation, interaction, and decision making from within to improve the community. Next, place, focusing on the physical space, but also household level wealth creation to help the community and neighborhoods grow. And lastly, systems, understanding and changing practices and policies in community development and economic development at a governmental level. Using those 4 comprehensive strategies, 4 goals were crafted intended to guide an inclusive and equitable economic development process that was community driven. These became GRG's pillar for equitable economic impact. First is design. My efforts are centered around assisting our community engagement team, our project managers, and consultants to successfully engage with the community adjacent to the Greenway, ensuring that the history and the culture of these communities are reflected in the project. Next, stay in place, looking at ways to get ahead of inequitable gentrification. That includes supporting existing residents through programming and research while promoting the creation and growth of a diverse neighborhood around the Greenway. Next, business development, working with city agencies and other stakeholders to not only bring in new businesses, but to help the existing businesses grow and thrive within their community. And lastly, equitable outcomes, making sure that GRG has the policies and procedures in place to be a good steward to the community, focused on operating in a fair and equitable manner. And the last key recommendation of this working group was the creation of my position, someone who would solely focus on these areas of work every day. So how do we build equitable communities? Now I've explained the Brickline project, the framework, and the pillars that guide my work. Let's discuss how I'm using this to help build equitable communities and empower the residents in them. All of our work is grounded in community engagement. We've talked to thousands of St. Louisans. Engagement for this project is a collaborative process, and it takes many voices and a broad participation. And through a continuous feedback loop, this is what we've heard. The residents want a strong community, one with resources and assets. They want us to reactivate the business corridors with vibrant storefronts and mixed-use developments with affordable housing units. The stakeholders want an executable development plan that specifically lays out the needs and the wants of the community, focused on stabilizing the housing stock and increasing the population density. Potential partners, they want to leverage the Greenway to assist the community service providers, the nonprofit organizations, and the educational institutions. They also want to help bring in financial institutions with goals and outcomes aligned with the community's needs. And lastly, my work is centered around working with the mayor's office to revamp old programs and roll out new programs and initiatives, including the Economic Justice Action Plan, which we'll review later. So we've listened and we've heard, and we've tried to produce executable strategies that will produce tangible results. As a part of this listening process, some of the strategies we look forward to doing are creating an economic development programming that will revitalize the neighborhoods adjacent to the Greenway, strengthening the existing businesses and attracting new community resources to help fill in those gaps. Next, we'll reestablish the business corridors along the major thoroughfares with connectivity to the adjacent neighborhoods. Also, we'll try to increase the neighborhood population through sustainable single-family home ownership and affordable housing units. And lastly, establishing an economic development organization that can help coordinate and facilitate those activities while supporting and building capacity in the existing special business districts, community development corporations, and the neighborhood associations. So based on in-depth engagement and collaboration with 3 neighborhood associations, GRG has been working to identify key projects and initiatives that our organization has the capacity to support. Through my collaborative work with these neighborhoods, along with St. Louis Development Corporation, we've identified a collaborative community development corporation as an initiative that we'd like to pursue. This work will be completed parallel with the City of St. Louis's neighborhood planning process. GRG will lead this effort to establish a collaborative CDC, but that will cover the footprint of the Brickline Greenway North Connector specifically. It will include the following programmatic areas: continued engagement, including neighborhood and stakeholder workshops and meetings, establishing a steering committee that will include residents, key stakeholders, and that SLDC staff, drafting a framework plan for the Community Development Corporation that will include governance, committees, and programming driven by community need. And lastly, incorporating a 501c3 no later than the end of this year. So to achieve results requires developing and maintaining strong relationships. I will be honest with you and clear, GRG, Great Rivers Greenway, is not an economic development agency, but we work with partners who can help us at various levels. We work with the city, their economic development agency, SLDC, partners in neighborhoods, and other people that can help us fill in the resource gaps and help build the capacity of the neighborhood associations along with the existing CDCs. I do want to highlight two key partners. SLDC helped directly fund 50% of my salary. And under their guidance and the economic justice plan shown here, a citywide redevelopment plan focused on building equity, I work directly within this agency. It allows me to have access to all of the city redevelopment tools and incentives, along with working with the city's mayor's office to identify policies and initiatives that can help accelerate community-based change. And this comes with many challenges. It also comes with many opportunities. So I'll just highlight some of the clear challenges and opportunities that stand before me. First is community trust. These communities have been disinvested and been given so many broken promises that they're skeptical of any new agency or organization coming into their footprint. However, this is an opportunity to empower the community to help address those systematic barriers and then also let them be able to fully promote the equitable economic development. Next, historical disinvestment. Many underserved communities have faced decades of disinvestment, leaving infrastructure, education, and healthcare systems underdeveloped and creating more economic development barriers. However, this is an opportunity for us to invest in infrastructure, public spaces, and amenities. Note, these efforts should celebrate and preserve the cultural heritage of the community to encourage and enhance community pride. Obviously, there'll be gentrification pressures. That's why my role was created. The efforts to revitalize underserved areas can lead to gentrification with rising property values, and it also leads to the displacement of long-term residents and businesses that undermines that community trust and cultural identity. However, we can use this equitable economic development opportunity to enhance the services, to bring in resources, and give opportunities for healthcare, education, and affordable housing. Next, limited resources. There's a lack of networks and connections required to have that targeted investment and community-driven initiatives. However, through building strong partnerships, we can foster innovation, leverage resources, and ensure the development happens in these communities is responsive to the local needs and priorities. So as I close out, I put this for you. This project is an opportunity to imagine or reimagine what St. Louis can be and what a Greenway project can do for us to get there. It is grounded in our region's sense of civic pride and our sense of what is possible here. We can also ask, how can GRG do this better? And how can our city and our region be more connected, more equitable, and less divided? To learn more about the Brickline Greenway or my work, please visit our website. Alejandro, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Chris. That was wonderful. I really like the holistic community development approach that your organization is using to this project. Really inspirational. Next, we'll hear about Tomas's work with Chainbreaker Collective. Tomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I want to make sure I'm sharing my screen correctly. Does it look right?
Yes.
Great, thank you so much. Well, my name is Tomas Rivera. I am the executive director of Chainbreaker Collective. And Chainbreaker is a membership-based community organization in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And we are we've been working with Prevention Institute for the last couple of years in the Parks People and Power cohort. And so really excited to be here today to discuss some of that work. As mentioned before, Chainbreaker, out of those three things, power is the most important to us. So I'm just going to start off by giving you a little bit of context. Many people, don't know of Santa Fe or New Mexico. I could talk about it forever. That is my hometown, but I will just give you the basics. Like I said, Chainbreaker is a 501c3 here in Santa Fe. This is our 20th year. We are a racial, economic, and environmental justice organization, and we have about 800 dues-paying members. The bulk of our members are low-income people of color, transit-dependent bus riders, and people living in neighborhoods that are vulnerable to gentrification and displacement. And I think what's important to understand about Chainbreaker and groups like Chainbreaker that do base building, community organizing, is what is the absolute fundamental part of our work is ensuring that the people most impacted by the work that we do are leading. And for us, we say from base to board, we are directly impacted by the work. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but I just want to go over some definitions about how Chainbreaker talks about some of the issues being used today. Particularly equity. I know that people have seen this graphic before. It's just something we pulled off of the web really easily. I think what's important for us is to recognize that that equity is about addressing and repairing harm. And so it's not just about distribution. It is a real deeper, much more systemic approach to policymaking and development. When we talk about gentrification, as mentioned before, I think the most key thing to understand is that neighborhoods with a history of disinvestment become vulnerable to gentrification, because when there is an influx of investment and resources in the neighborhood, kind of throws the market into this just wild shockwave that really people who've been living there can't afford. And that happens in Santa Fe. It happens in cities around the country. But most of the time, it becomes a racial justice issue. Gentrification predominantly affects people of color. And so this is what the cycle looks like to us. As mentioned before, we started doing transportation organizing. We sort of evolved to do work around larger built environment work and housing justice, because our members identified that you can't talk about transportation without talking about housing. So you can follow these QR codes, which go into that a little bit more, and you can see this diagram. They'll be included with the slides as well. But I'm here mostly today to talk about, of course, parks and how we can avoid displacement through that. So this is our city. This is Santa Fe. This is what it looks like. And this is the downtown area, this first red dot. Santa Fe is largely a tourist-based economy. Most of our jobs are in service. The rest that are not in service are either in healthcare or government. And so that's where the job centers are in this area downtown here. Santa Fe is notoriously expensive to live in for a city our size. So people don't live close to where they work. They get pushed farther and farther out of the city to areas with lack of public amenities, things like jobs, schools, and most visibly parks. And that creates this cycle of commuting back home of the places they live to do things like grocery shopping and largely to work, forcing car dependency, which was again our primary issue that we started off. And that does create this cycle of pollution and poverty that really becomes hard to get out of. That's just the dynamics. Again, this is not unique to Santa Fe, but this is how it looks here. These maps and some of these graphics all come from reports that we will share at the end of the presentation. Just to note that we haven't updated this information since the last census report was due. That was during the COVID pandemic, and it's slowed things down for us, to say the least. But we do know that these dynamics in Santa Fe have not gotten better. You can see the reddish areas are where we have lost people of color through displacement over time. You can see dramatic changes, 20% losses nearly here. And this dynamic has only gotten worse. What it's led to is a segregated city. And again, this is not unique to Santa Fe, but this is what it looks like here. You can see people being pushed farther to the west and south parts of the city, where we are condensing both poverty and people of color. This is what the income looks like. This is median income graph. You can see some of these neighborhoods the darker neighborhoods are significant wealth. And this is not tracking wealth, this is tracking income. So there's a little bit of a nuance that most of us will understand here. We're gonna focus on some of these neighborhoods in a second, but really just wanting to show what we're dealing with in Santa Fe and how that relates in a national context. So why we're here today talking about this, again, these dynamics are not new to Santa Fe, but they're not unique to Santa Fe, but they're a part of the national conversation. And parks really present a very important piece of community organizing. It became very visible to us when we conducted our first health impact assessment report. And we were not surprised to see that the dynamics in the previous slides, but we were a little bit shocked to see how parks were distributed. Parks are one of the most visible identifiers of either. Parks are also a good catalyst for organizing because people universally, or at least in our experience, maybe not universally, but largely support parks, especially if they're maintained. And so we're gonna, this is the park distribution. The only thing I wanna just highlight for those of you not familiar with Santa Fe is these areas over here where it's showing very little parks. Those are not, that's a national park, that is a forest. So there's homes in there, but there's no built parks for that reason. This is Hopewell Mann. It is where most of our members live. It is directly in the center of the city, and it has 0 parks built. And it is the most vulnerable to gentrification. And so again, these dynamics are not unique to Santa Fe, but this is how they look here. So you can see, of course, it is a largely neighborhood of color, and it is the poorest in the city. Our second area of focus is in the Airport Road corridor here. And again, you can see a lack of parks. What I want to point out here is you can see this 13. That number is a statistic given to us by the city, which is counting a park that has not been built. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but so that is misleading, that 13 number there. It's actually a third, whatever a third of 13 is. So here are those dynamics here. And why I'm pointing this out is, again, Chainbreaker approaches this work through a civil rights lens and a racial justice lens. And oftentimes, particularly when we're working with city governments and city staff, there's a discomfort in talking about it in those ways. But what is made clear through these health impact assessment reports is that you can't discuss one without the other. And clearly, income is related here, right? You can see that income is part of the conversation. But in fact, what actually unites all of these neighborhoods, even when there is wealth in some of them, it's racial demographics. And so again, this is not new to a lot of people, but that is what we're dealing with in Santa Fe. What I really want to spend the rest of the time focusing on is what community organizing can bring about in terms of victories here. So, you know, putting up those graphics, those are all things that people are used to seeing, that kind of stuff in your cities. I think most of us are here because we want to figure out what to do with it. So let me just show you the path of Chainbreaker's victory in working together with city governments in order to make that happen. Like I said, we started off as a transit-based organization, but in 2012, our members said we got to expand. The reason we need more transit is because we can't afford to live in the city. Let's address that. So immediately, our very first campaign in this area was around a park. And that happened in 2012. It was a bond to get a park in this neighborhood built. This is the first regional park in the neighborhood. And it really forced a conversation about equity. As you can see the demographics before, it begged the question, why are there no parks there in the first place? And we made that a very big part of the campaign. And it created controversy. It forced that conversation out into the public. We even had we had one person on an official city advisory committee quoted publicly on the record as saying, why would we build a park in that neighborhood? Just to give the kids another place to sell their drugs, question mark. So it wasn't subtle, and it doesn't get subtle. And this was, about 10 years ago, but the work continues. And then, this timeline graphic is going to be there to show you how long it really takes to make systemic change. So this bond that passed was just for the first phase of the park, which should be completed in 3 phases. It's been 10 years later, and we only have that first third built, which is again why I highlighted that is not a correct number there. So I'm just going to speed through this a little bit. Some of these milestones won't be significant on a national level, other than to show you how an organization like Chainbreaker builds a victory upon victory upon victory so that we can actually change the dynamics of inequities in our city. We had a campaign where we created a Residents' Bill of Rights. That was an 18-month-long campaign knocking on people's doors that we turned into a resolution that passed through our city council unanimously about 2 years later. The next big step was we recognized that development can often lead to displacement. It's been highlighted before, even on this call. I don't need to go into more depth about it. It's pretty common knowledge. And it's not just housing, as we mentioned, it's parks. It is investments in the neighborhoods. It is approaching through a holistic view. Our members recognized that it is a false choice to assume that we either have to live with disinvestment or be displaced from our neighborhoods. And what that amounts to is when developments happen, particularly in vulnerable neighborhoods, they must be connected with policies and procedures that protect the surrounding neighborhood. So we can't just focus on development. We have to make it development without displacement. They have to go hand in hand, whether it's parks, whether it's transit hubs, whether it's housing complexes, whatever, we need to have that larger analysis. That brings us to a campaign that we are still in 2018, where our city owns a piece of public land that was leased out to a private college that decided to break their lease and just leave right here in this neighborhood, right across from that central neighborhood that we were talking about before. Now, this is 64 acres of publicly owned land. It's owned by the city. This is not blighted in any way, shape, or form. It is prime real estate in the middle of the city, but it is surrounded by some of the most vulnerable neighborhoods by far in our city. So immediately our members looked at this and said, this is both an opportunity and a threat. We need to engage, and all of our attention went on focusing on this. Now, when you're talking about a 64-acre development, we're not just talking about housing. Of course, there's a housing crisis everywhere, including Santa Fe, but we want full communities. We recognize, after years of organizing, that we need parks, we need schools, we need grocery stores, we need all of these things, and 64 acres allows us to do it. What's unique about this project as well is that this is publicly owned land, so we already have some access to it, and there's a measure of accountability. But our members quickly identified through organizing campaign and a people's assembly that we hosted. Many of the planners that we worked with for this would call it a charrette. They called it a day-long charrette. For us, it was an assembly. We got about 150 people to be there through the entire day and identify what was important to them to see on the property and to see in the surrounding neighborhoods. That boiled down to community land trust as the long-term solution to housing stability in the area. And community land trusts can also not just focus on housing, but parks and open spaces, commercial, residential, it can evolve into all of that. And a slew of policy recommendations, protecting renters from eviction and predatory rent increases were all brought to the forefront there. Through that, what would be called a charrette by many. In that process, we worked with the city council to pass a resolution to create a larger community engagement process before any development would happen on the property. Through that, we knocked on 17,000 doors in Santa Fe in order to build upon the community engagement process. And then COVID happened in 2020. Really shifted our focus a lot. That made us have to focus on evictions, which was the immediate need in our community. And that changed a little bit our approach. We kept our work on Midtown happening, and the engagement resolution went into effect with Chainbreaker being part of it. I want to pause for a second here because it looks like we're not talking about parks throughout this whole thing. This timeline is about showing the stepping stones it takes for us to build and the interconnectedness of the work that an organizing group like Chainbreaker does, and to recognize that the green victories here, the ones in green are overtly parks related. There is 10 years between when we started that conversation when we continued it here in 2022. That's when we started forming renters committees, specifically to protect against unjust evictions throughout the pandemic. We helped focus on evictions to work with our mayor, who extended our eviction moratorium, which many were across the country, but ours was one of the last, if not the last, to actually be held. So that was again, this is a decade-long fight until we get to our next park victory, which is in this neighborhood here. Now, you can see this little round area is where we have a community, a mobile home park in which we have a renters committee. And through that eviction organizing, so we well organized in this neighborhood. When we were approached by a private developer, a nonprofit developer, about this development immediately next to it, we were ready to move and engage. Our members were informed. They understood both the risks and the opportunities and what they wanted here. So we were able to form a strong partnership with this developer, who is going to develop these 22 acres. They increased the amount of public space into a 6 acres worth of public park that they will develop and then give to the city, which is a phenomenal thing on their part. There's trail connectivity there that wouldn't be there otherwise. And there's 50% affordable units on there. What I think is really incredible is we created what we think of as sort of an informal right of first refusal for our members here. None of that would have been possible without the work that was leading up during the eviction process. So organizing is what allowed those victories to happen. And this was a controversial park as well, but we mobilized our members to go to city council and support this, this development in the face of a lot of NIMBY pushback. Really those members there being present, giving testimony is, we believe, turned the tide in that vote. We were able to connect that to our Midtown work and show why it's so important to have community involved in the process, and how we can actually have development without displacement, and how we can actually work in partnership with developers and city staff people. And that helped us pass the community development plan for Midtown, which included some of the policy recommendations that our members were calling for, in particular, a community land trust on the property. Next, we said, how do we fund that? Obviously, as you all know, it often comes down to the budget conversations. And so this year, or last year, we passed a transfer tax that will tax $1 million homes to fund our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And so again, that stepstone process continues, and we fully expect another decade to happen while we continue doing this organizing work. I'm gonna leave this up for a second because the point that I'm trying to emphasize here is we are proud of our organizing, but this is how long it takes. And in each one of these victories, we were working with city staff people, public officials, yes, but really at the end of the day, many times people who are on the ground doing the work in the city departments, in the Parks and Recreation Department, in the Affordable Housing Department, often will outlast administrations. And I'm telling you, most organizations like Chainbreaker will definitely outlast them. And that's what it takes to win, is that deep commitment to the long haul of community organizing with a very clear focus on justice, on equity, knowing that yes, the parks themselves are important, but to us and to most community members that we know, they are symbols, or I should say that they are a physical manifestation of what it means to have equity in our built environment. And we know that the people living through life experience, we may not be developers, we may not be planners, we may not understand curb height and drainage, but those are learnable skills. The experience is not something that's learnable. So that trust that was being talked about earlier, that partnership is really what makes it possible. We need those partnerships. And in order to have those partnerships, we need to recognize that it takes a long time. That's why I left that timeline up. Just kind of changing the system in this way takes a long time. And we need to trust each other. We need to understand that we have different roles. We need to know that we have different positions. We have different levels of accountability. For instance, a director of a department maybe can't launch a protest, but Chainbreaker certainly can. And if we do that in collaboration, we understand that we need to protect each other as well. Again, if we are at lasting administrations, elected officials are absolutely important in this. But the rubber hits the road when we talk to the people who are putting the work on the ground. And so we need to have clarity of purpose. We need to honor our alliances. And fundamentally, that boils down to trust. And I think that it was mentioned before, trust has significantly been broken by many city governments. It is a breach of trust to disinvest in the neighborhood for generations. And so when people come, particularly those of you that are working inside the city and trying to build that trust, it's important to recognize that that trust needs to be built. It needs to be built over time, and it needs to be proven that it is something that we can count on both directions. And so that level of accountability and partnerships, Chainbreaker believes organizations like ours will continue doing the organizing work. We can't do it alone. If we ever want to actually change this system, we are going to need those partnerships. We're going to need to fully engage and to trust each other. And I think that, again, I know a lot of the folks on this call are in those city positions. The one thing that I want to just give you in our experience of advice is when that trust is broken, when people are really feeling the weight of the years of disinvestment and the anger, the rage, the trauma, all of that comes with it. Sometimes they will focus on the individual there, but we know it's not personal. It's not personal. If you're on this call, you're likely to share our values. We need to just, again, build that trust and move on together. So I could talk about this forever. I know that my time is up. This QR code will lead to some of the reports that the maps that we pulled up are there. If you have any more questions, if you'd like to engage further, if you want some of the details about our community land trust work or our renter protection work, please don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you so much for having us be part of this presentation today. I'm looking forward to the questions.
Thank you, Tomas. I really like the focus on organizing and power building and the framing of all of this as as green space and parks as something that needs to be seen within a broader context of displacement, housing stability, and economic stability for folks. So now we have about 10 minutes for Q&A, and there's a couple of them that have come in, and I'm gonna maybe wait a few more minutes to see if there's more that are somewhat along kind of the lines of these and connected. But I'm gonna go first with one that I kind of wanted to share. Both of you are already talked about sort of what can parks and recreation agencies do to kind of engage in this kind of work. But I wonder if you could just share one more thing about kind of the role of these parks and rec agencies. In general, those agencies don't do housing directly, they don't do community or economic development. So what are some of the partnerships that are probably needed, and what are some of the direct things instead that parks and rec agencies can do to advance the work that you described? So let's start with Chris, and then we go to Tomas.
Yeah, I think Tom Motz kind of hit on it originally, right? So he said, like, those city agencies, as parks, we typically have those strong relationships with city agencies and city government. So it's just making sure that we're putting policies and procedures in place that align with strong community engagement. And so luckily in St. Louis, the current mayor and her administration are strong on community building and community engagement and letting that be the lens that drives anything in our city right now. And so it's easy for us to do the work because that's the backing of how we do our process anyway. Is we start in community and we work backwards, pull the project out of community. And so having a government system that works a lot, that aligns with that is great. So if you can build that relationship or leverage that relationship with a good government around you, be it regionally or city level, I mean, use it. It's greatly beneficial.
Thank you. Mas?
Yeah, I think, kind of just tapping into what I was saying before is recognizing the different roles that we play is certainly parks departments focus on parks, and that makes sense. Community members will say we don't want housing without parks, and we don't want parks without housing. And I think that everybody would recognize that that's the case. That's why working with organizations like Chainbreaker, other community groups that are representative of the community, we can help make those bridges. And we can help make the case to the folks that are calling the shots, be it a city council or whoever is that in your city. We can help make that case and bring those together. And oftentimes that will come with things like funding from the mansion tax and things like that as well. That's why those partnerships are so critical. We don't know how to build a park, but we know they need to be built. So I'm going to keep underlining that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So a couple of questions came in through the platform. One is from Robin. Robin asks to both of you, have you or are you aware of any communities providing property tax relief or caps to existing homeowners to prevent displacement in gentrifying communities?
Yeah,
Whoever wants to take it.
I can go first. So here in St. Louis, we are literally a month ago, our city government, our aldermen passed a new legislature that will protect two neighborhoods that actually are part of the collaborative CDC that we're forming. And so as a part of a blight study, which normally has a negative connotation, this blight study was to promote a redevelopment plan. And a part of the negotiation with the neighbors, and that's us empowering our residents to speak up for themselves. They said, if you're going to do a blight study, then we want some concessions to this study. And one of the concessions was that they would put a 10-year moratorium on the property taxes. So whatever your house is appraised for now during this redevelopment study, it gets to stay there for 10 years. And it's, like I said, directly impacts my work because it's two communities that I work in every day. So kudos to our administration for taking that on.
Awesome. Tomas, do you have anything to add?
Sure. Well, certainly largely we organize renters, so I'm not an expert in this, but I do know that our New Mexico on the state level does have some has thought a lot about this and has some strong protections in this way. So I can't speak directly to it, but I can encourage you to do the research there. I do know that on the local level, we've looked into things like this mansion tax that specifically targets higher end homes. Also things like anti-flipping, anti-speculation taxes. We've seen those pop up in places in the Bay Area, or at least attempts at them. So there's certainly ways to make that happen. But as you know, anytime we talk about any sort of tax, it's, again, going to require the organizing behind it in order to get it passed.
Awesome. Let's see, there's a lot coming in. I think another one that maybe both of you can talk about is how is distance displacement kind of handled in your work? So if you can talk about whether your work has addressed the displacement of existing business that comes with gentrification in relation to parks or not, and what can be done. So just to flip the script, let's start with Tomas this time.
Sure. Well, we don't organize businesses. So again, our focus is on renters. I can say that, especially with like our the Midtown campaign that we touched on, with that level of development, of course, commercial has to be part of it. And so, we want to look at things like a community land trust in which the people who are directly impacted will have a say on what kind of businesses that they want there, help incubate local businesses with local higher preferences, and really help circulate the economy within it to support it and not lead to disinvestment. So, I can't say that we have tried to bring them back. That's not Chainbreaker's work. But I do know that we can create a future in which we stop displacement of any kind, but through things like community land trusts. So that's how Chainbreaker's approach would be at this point.
Awesome.
And on our end, luckily we're early on in the process where there really hasn't been many speculative buyers or businesses that have been displaced. I'll be honest, this area has been disinvested and kind of sparse with businesses already. So we do work with the mayor's office and the St. Louis Development Corporation to leverage initiatives they have. Just about 4 or 5 months ago, St. Louis Development Corporation, SLDC, they had a small business grant, which was intended to specifically support small businesses in North St. Louis, which is the under resource area of our community. And so the focus was put there. And what they did was they actually going through the process because it was ARPA funding and the requirements that were required. The paperwork had to be great, right? And so what they were able to do is actually help build capacity with these businesses and get their business licenses done right and get their taxes cleaned up. And so even though some of those businesses might not have got the grant, they got the resources from the city to help get themselves in line for the next time those opportunities come. So the city's working hard on leveraging that equity lens of saying, how do we bring businesses back to this neighborhood and make sure that they're businesses that they want? So I will add that on the very end of that. It is, as I'm doing my work, we're also looking at form-based code and other things to say what type of businesses do these communities want there. They don't want a lot of liquor stores. They don't want car washes. They want things that can provide resources to them.
Thank you, Chris. There's a lot of really cool questions. We have about 3 minutes to go, so I can only ask one more that I think is relevant to your expertise. If you can briefly talk about how your organizations built in the staff and organizational capacity to do work on anti-displacement. So let's go with Tomas again first.
Sure. So groups like Chainbreaker are painfully under-resourced. And it is really hard to fund community organizing, particularly when we have the focus that we do. Locally, we are challenging a lot of really wealthy individuals and people like the Realtors Association with a lot of power, and that makes it a challenge. On the national level, that timeline that I showed you, it is funders are often reluctant to look at that and invest in community organizing, even though we demonstrate time and time again it's what's necessary. So I want to just say it's incredibly a challenge, and for us it has been. We're a 20-year organization, and it has only been the last few that we've been able to grow to meet the demand and the capacity that we need. So we've really leaned on our members for that. Our members have put in tireless, countless, just it's so humbling to know how much people have invested in their own liberation. And that's one of the reasons why this kind of community organizing by the people on the front lines is so critical. Because like I said before, if we're fighting for our lives and our livelihood, we're not going to stop until we win. And that has been really fundamental to us. I can also say in terms of working with cities, those of you on the call that are inside the city and want to work with groups like us, recognize that community organizing is work. It is hard work. Knocking on 17,000 doors is not something you do as an afterthought. That takes skill, takes coordination, takes training. And often when the city has come to us and said, we want to fund this support, they're like, here's $1,000, and that don't play for the flyers that we need. So just recognize that for us, it's not about the money, but it does take the money to make it happen. And for the funders on this call, those things like the P3 initiative have been really critical. Investing in community organizing, trusting people, that long-term investment, that's really leading the nation. And so we're eternally grateful for that partnership.
Thank you so much. Chris, 30 seconds. Sorry, we're really short on time.
I think somebody asked me a great question in the chat. I hope I answered it right. I think we're an amplifier, right? So what I try to do is I try to work with those organizations that are already doing the work in the community and try to back out how I can be a resource to them, how I can use our capacity to build their capacity. And so I think until that economic development organization comes online and it can be the facilitator, right now my role is to amplify and say, hey, there's people in the community that are doing great work like Tomas, and how can we help them? Is there funding for them? Is there capacity for volunteers? How can we get behind them to help move their work forward? And so that's what GRG allows me to do every day. Spend most of my time networking and finding stakeholders to help move the work forward until I have the capacity internally to do it myself.
Thank you so much to both of you. So in the interest of time, that was our last question. Just a reminder that the link presentations and resources that are related are going to be emailed to all people who registered within 2 business days. If you can also, please take a minute to fill out the short evaluation that will pop up after you leave the session. So a few other announcements. So City Park Alliance and the Prevention Institute will be hosting a peer conversation on May 13th, exploring the lived experiences of green gentrification. This will be a great opportunity to continue this conversation and to interact with peers on the topic. This will be only open to City Park Alliance members and to members of the PI's People, Parks, and Power cohort. The Alliance will also host a webinar about equitable and resilient urban forests on April 29th. Registration is open for both events. If you're interested in continuing education credits for AICP, LACES, or City Parks Alliance General CU offering, look for a follow-up email in the next 2 days with some instructions on how to claim your credits. Registration is also open for the exciting City Parks Alliance Greater and Greener 2024 conference, which is taking place June 21st to 25th in Seattle, Washington. We're setting the table for conversations around the complex challenges that we all face in using parks to create equitable, vibrant, resilient, and inclusive communities. Sessions are filling up fast, so please visit greatergreener.org for more info and how to register. Finally, a big thank you to Chris and Tomas for joining us today and sharing the great work they're doing to ensure that the new park projects truly serve the communities where they're located and lead to grow the benefits of residents. We hope that you've learned some helpful strategies today and that you can use or adapt in your own communities as you plan new park projects. If you have additional questions for me or for the 2 speakers, our emails are on the slides, and the slides again will be sent to you with the recording. And then just to close it out, many thanks for all of you for participating. Thanks for engaging. Thanks for asking great questions. And keep up the great work you're doing in our nation urban parks. Bye-bye.